from when we started NORML, and it was not because we started NORML, I think the mood of the country was lightening up about 1970 anyway, but up through about 79, the surveys all showed we were gaining support every year. We didn't have majority support because we only had 12%. I think Paul said 13 or something at the beginning. It was actually 12%, the first Gallup poll was taken in 1979. But we were increasing incrementally every year, and we assumed that we had the wind of public opinion at our back and it would never change. Well, when you look at those polling results now in hindsight, what you see is by 79, the polls started back down, less in favor of our position, and they continued until 1990. And that's relevant because you understand from the last state we won decriminalization was Nebraska in 77 or 78, I think 78. We didn't, the movement, we did not win another single statewide victory for 18 years. Now, we held on to the 11 states that had decriminalized marijuana, only sometimes by the fingernails, but we managed to beat back efforts to repeal those laws. But we didn't win another single state until 1996, when California passed Prop 213. And again, what's fascinating when you look at the polling is, you can see why we won California in 1996, because starting about 1990, the mood of the country began to come back in our direction. And when that happens, folks, I think the lesson we learned then, and I'm going to be stressing this week in every occasion I have, don't take the public support we currently enjoy for granted. There is no guarantee that 2 years or 5 years from now we're going to have that. I think we are, but I thought we were in the late 1970s, and I was damn wrong. So I would say this, make hay while the sun shines, we used to say on the farm. Right now, we enjoy the highest level of support we've ever enjoyed in this country. It's over 50% nationwide, which means on the East and West Coast, we're 55, 58% support. So when people say to me, I have a problem with that initiative in Washington, it's not perfect, or I have a problem with that initiative in Colorado, it's not perfect. I would say to you, understand, you may not have a chance for another legalization initiative for 4 years or even 8 years, and there is no guarantee you're going to have the support to win it in 4 years. So let's legalize marijuana now, and we can perfect that legalization over the next 2 years.
Is younger than I am, and she comes and interviews us about, what's happening, what happened in the past, what could happen in the future. I'm 25 years younger than Keith, or so, I'm 47. So I am the generation, I am the generation that this was entirely targeted to. So in 1978, Keith, there was an announcement over our elementary school that we were all going to go into the gym and watch an NBC special called Reading, Writing, and Reefer.
That's right.
And when there was only 3 networks, more or less, in the United States, to get so many elementary schools. I was in Amherst, Massachusetts, a very progressive college town, but still, it was pervasive. And so that parents' movement I saw come together in that NBC special, which Tom Brokaw was the host of. We have charted now for so long marijuana attitudes in this country that here's the important facts I would suggest regarding demographics. Between the ages of 25 and 52, we as Americans lose our minds about marijuana because of our children. Because NORML's been around so long, we can now chart the fact that as people turn into their 50s, they then have a different attitude, a more progressive one, if you will, about marijuana. And regarding the parents' movement today, I do think that the NWA is a really strong vehicle to address this, and that today I can't even imagine not listening to parents. If someone is talking to us today about marijuana, usually it's forward-looking about how will it work for my children. It's not a fearful, demonized, vilified thing. So having heard this, Mitch, what is some of your thoughts about the movement that Keith found himself starting? Emily has now charted this parents' movement, and you have observed and written about this yourself quite a bit.
It's no surprise that I see this as a history of science and ignorance, if you will. In the beginning, we always heard outrageous claims about cannabis and didn't often have data, or even had manufactured data that weren't true. Recently, Gabriel Nahas died, and a lot of folks did not weep because he made up data suggesting that cannabis did pretty much everything evil you could possibly imagine, and a whole bunch of things you would never imagine. As the data keep coming in, we see how much effort researchers have to go to in order to make cannabis sound bad. Oh, wait, it changes your brain structure. As long as I have 64 things on your head and make you do the most complicated tasks ever done in the world, I can finally see yours is almost this different from another person's. Obviously, the fact that we have to go through these kinds of steps is pretty telling. And as more and more literature gets published, we keep finding, the outrageous truths that cannabis makes you sleepy and hungry. With that in mind, though, I keep wanting to spread the news so that every time I get somebody calling up saying, I hear marijuana makes you schizophrenic, I hear marijuana does this, I hear marijuana does that, my wife can handle these calls on the phone now. And that really makes me happy. And so I feel like every time somebody spreads the word just a little bit, it's really a win for our side. I was down at the gym this morning at 7 in the morning. I'm not bragging. I'm actually telling a story because Richard Lee's mother was there talking it up right in the middle of the gym to the guy right next to her. And I thought, I have never actually heard someone talk about how racist cannabis laws are while I was on the exercise bike. We really have made progress, and I know there are times in this conference where you can think, oh my God, things are so terrible, how are we going to ever recover? But we've never had 3 states considering legalization before. We've never had this many medical marijuana states before, and we've never had this many people polling saying, yes, I understand that tax and regulated market is the way to go, so hooray for us.
So it's just moving the conversation along and through here. Keith, when and you're going to allude a lot about this in your remarks tomorrow, but in your infamous "we have so much fun with you" by your claim that marijuana would be legal by 1978, of course we still do believe you. So, encapsulized, where do you see the successes of the reform movement, not NORML, but just the reform movement in general, and what are some just general fears you may have for the future?
Well, I think sometimes as activists, all of us think that we win particular debates or we make a little progress politically because we're crafty. We come up with an argument that they haven't heard before, or we're a little brighter than our opponents who must be ignorant if they oppose legalization. The reality is that's not really what makes a difference between winning and losing. In politics, what makes the difference is whether you have won the support of the hearts and minds of the majority of Americans. It's not trickery. And so what I see now, of course, is that we know we literally have more living Americans who support full legalization than not. So for the moment, I think, I feel pretty comfortable. That's not going to turn around overnight, even as I fear that don't assume it'll be just as strong in 5 years or 10 years. But these movements take a long time to build up, and they tend to take a long time even when they head back the other direction. As I said, it took us 18 years to ride out the last bad period. And I hope to hell none of us see another 18 years. But what I do see ahead is with just a little bit of luck, we are clearly, even I, expect to live long enough now to see full legalization in a number of states. And I'm quite certain most of you will with that question, but even a lot of us old-timers, I think, are going to make it. What I think we have to be careful about is that we understand the campaign that is winnable right now. It is not technically a pro-pot campaign. What the data shows us is, well, first off, The percentage of American adults who smoke marijuana is somewhere between 11 and 13%. So what that means is between 89 and 87% of the adult population do not smoke. And so if we are going to win this issue, our argument must appeal to a majority of those non-smokers. Our goal cannot be limited to winning applause at the Seattle Hemp Fest or the Boston Freedom Rally or at a NORML conference. As nice as we find those, as reinforcing. We have to make sure that our arguments appeal to the majority of non-smokers in America. And that is precisely what Colorado has done, it's what Washington has done, and it is why those initiatives enjoy, right now at least, 8, 9, 10-point lead among the public. So let's make sure we don't lose sight. I like getting high. I've been smoking now for 47 years. I like to brag that I first smoked marijuana when I was a freshman at Georgetown Law School. I know Georgetown loves me to say that. But so I'm a stoner, and if I could pick what a marijuana law would look like, I would pick the tomato model. You know, don't give me any limits whatsoever. Let me grow as much as I want and share it with friends, and it's none of the state's business. That will never. That will never pass in America, folks. That simply isn't going to happen. So what we need to do is to pare down and recognize those parts of that are achievable. And what is achievable is, Jimmy Carter famously said in his statement to Congress in 1976 in a line that I actually can take credit because I helped draft it. I had the fortunate time to have a speechwriter ask me to come over and help him draft that statement for the president. And he said, a line we had come up with was that the laws against marijuana should never cause more harm than the use of the drug itself. That's not a pro-pot position, folks. That's a marijuana prohibition is bad statement, is what it is. And that still should be at the center of all of our political arguments. So I don't see any short-term risks. I don't think the parents' movement is going to gain much ground. I think that argument that it sends the wrong message to kids, people have largely gotten over that. I mean, if we dumb down America to where adults cannot do anything that's inappropriate for children, you can't drive cars, have sex, ride motorcycles, skydive, and who wants to live in a society where all you can do is something appropriate for a 12-year-old? So I really think what we need to do is keep the pedal to the metal. I think we need to put every resource we can garner to moving this ahead, and if we do, I literally do not see any major pitfalls in the immediate future. We're winning this battle, folks, finally.
When I first started at NORML in 1991, and I'm now almost in the 30,000th radio show, I'm done. Which means for a lot of them you do the question and answers, you know. Take calls from the, I was on K-Rock the other morning, the biggest rock and roll station in the United States here out of Los Angeles. And so, we did some Q&A in the morning, and that's for me one of the best parts, the biofeedback you get from people who are calling in. So in the 1990s, I used to do, hundreds and hundreds of calls a month of people calling, doesn't it cause males to develop breasts? Doesn't it cause criminality? Don't you go on to use harder drugs? And I found myself always talking about the gateway effect, et cetera, et cetera. Today, very few questions come from any strata of society about those. Most are forward-looking. How much will it be taxed? Will I still be drug tested? Can I still be? Can I use it in front of my children? Those are the questions I get now in the back and forth. So Dale, as we are here in pure rapture about marijuana and its legalization, it was made illegal, and it was made illegal first in Massachusetts. So in a very encapsulated way, can you help inform everybody here, why did this start? And in your view, why has it lasted 75 years?
Well, it isn't 75 years, it's 100 years. And that's the important point here. Common story about marijuana. marijuana prohibition is it was made federally illegal by the Marijuana Tax Act in 1937 at the instigation of Harry Anslinger of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics and this Reefer Madness campaign led by the Hearst Press and its public hysteria over pot-smoking Mexicans and Negroes and jazz musicians. But in fact, by that time, marijuana had already been made illegal in most of the states of the United States. And there was, in fact, an earlier cannabis prohibition movement that really got going 100 years ago when the whole drug control movement started in the United States. Over 100 years ago, of course, it used to be that drugs were entirely legal, but things started changing at the turn of the last century. And there were two major developments behind this. One was there was a nationwide prohibition temperance movement that was really focused on alcohol. And there's all sorts of stories at that time, 100 years ago, about the evils of alcohol, and that was a major campaign that led to a constitutional disaster of alcohol prohibition. Along with it, though, a lot of the proponents of this prohibition thought that this should go to all sorts of intoxicants, and that included narcotics, opium, morphine, cocaine. Now, cannabis wasn't really part of this conversation. There was no public concern about cannabis at the time. It was hardly used at the time. And what we call marijuana from Mexico really didn't get popularized until the 1920s. Nonetheless, cannabis got swept up in the movement for national narcotics control. And this was done really at the instigation of another new class that was arising at the time, the class of drug control bureaucrats. 100 years ago was the height of the progressive movement. The progressive movement was dedicated to getting government involved in things for the betterment of our health and welfare, getting away from the unregulated free market and making sure we had clean food and drugs and things like that. And it was, of course, the Pure Food and Drugs Act was first passed about 100 years ago by the progressives. Now, the Pure Food and Drugs Act, which is a fine act, had a labeling provision in it that said, from now on, it didn't restrict the sale of what we call narcotics or intoxicants, but it did say that if you had a product, a patent medicine, that had a drug in it, like alcohol, or opium, or cocaine, or cannabis, or chloral hydrate, which was you don't hear much about that anymore, that was a big scare at that time. Those had to be put on the label. So you had this list of narcotics hanging around. And about the same time, a little after this, you started to see some of the states taking action to limit the sale of these narcotics to prescription only, basically outlawing recreational use like opium dens and things like that. And this happened in many states. Massachusetts, in fact, put a law through in 1911, and it required the labeling, it restricted all hypnotics, it said, to prescription only. You could no longer buy hypnotics over the counter. What were the hypnotics? Well, opium was in there. I think they included cocaine, though it's not a hypnotic. And cannabis indica was just incidentally thrown in the list. Now, this happened too here in California. In fact, we're about to celebrate the centennial of cannabis prohibition here in California. It happened in 1913, and we're going to have a conference about this, commemorating it in San Francisco in January 26th and 27th. Everybody's invited to come up to Fort Mason, and we will discuss ending the 100-year war against cannabis. But basically, this was instigated by the California State Board of Pharmacy, which was really the agency that launched the first war on drugs pretty much in the nation. It was organized here in California because specifically there had been a lot of controversy over opium dens. So the Board of Pharmacy got this law passed that restricted opium to prescription only, and then they could go out and bust the dens, and they started the whole routine of the current war on drugs, where you had drug raids and informants and all of this sort of thing. They did that in 1907, and in 1911 to 12, one of the head of this campaign, a gentleman named Henry J. Finger, on the California Board of Pharmacy, said, you know, maybe we ought to include Indian hemp along with this. He didn't say marijuana because nobody was much concerned about it, nobody much heard of it. Indian hemp, however, was being used by some East Indian Hindus, actually they were Sikhs, who had recently come to San Francisco, and the Board of Pharmacy noted that, well, some of them are using this Indian hemp stuff. Maybe we better just prohibit it so it doesn't spread to the whites. And that's what they did. There was actually no public demand for this law. The pharmacists were against the law, but nobody paid attention because nobody was really using it. Now, the idea of the law was explained by Mr. Finger in a letter to the first U.S. drug czar, Hamilton Wright, who served in the State Department and helped engineer the Hague Convention and the Harrison Act, which would institute narcotics prohibition in the United States. Finger and Wright seriously discussed including cannabis in the international treaties and restrictions on drugs that they were instituting for opium and cocaine. And in their correspondence, they say, yeah, you know, sure, this cannabis isn't used much now, but you know, maybe once we clamp down on the opium, the fiends will start turning to that. So best just to include it. Now, it didn't get included in any national legislation, but it did get included in California, and a bunch of other states started joining on, Indiana, Wyoming. It's crazy. None of these places had a marijuana problem. So the idea was, we will pass these laws to prevent the marijuana problem, of course, or cannabis problem. The irony of it is, all the modern problems of marijuana have occurred in an environment of prohibition that was intended to prevent this in the first place. We never did have a legal marijuana market here in California. And I think there's an important lesson in this, in who was really responsible for doing this. Was there any public demand for it? No. It was written by drug control bureaucrats, by the state boards of pharmacy. And so have all our other laws. So was the 1937 Marijuana Tax Act, so was the Controlled Substances Act, and it is drug control bureaucrats at the DEA who keep marijuana on Schedule 1, even today. So I think the lesson here is that the marijuana laws have been a crime creation program for the benefit of the the narcocracy, as Dick Cowan calls it. And I think if you look at it today, they are in fact the major political obstacle we have to moving the agenda forward here in the U.S.
Well, to take 75 years, wondering how to try to encapsulate the way that you understand. Thank you, Gail, because I think you're right. When it comes to the 5 pillars of pot prohibition, I certainly included the very first one, the entities that were born of the prohibition, the DEA, ONDCP, NIDA, SAMHSA. I can name 20 other bureaucracies none of you have ever heard of that suck up billions and billions of our dollars a year to keep this machinery going, even though the public doesn't support it. So thank you, that's very cogent in understanding how we started this process. Dr. Lynn Zimmer, when she was alive, and was a wonderful researcher and individual and NORML board member. I visited her apartment one time in New York, and she had this amazing full-page story about marijuana. And I remember looking at it and thinking, wow, that is hysterical. The headline was crazy. It's hysterical to read. And I thought, you know, surely this has got to be like a 1935, 1937, 1940 publication. And she said, no, look at the publication date and where it was published. It was in 1927 Greenwich Village. Even then, that was the most bohemian place in all of America, and yet, and now that is found in my office. When she passed away, she gave that to me, and so for those who have never come to the NORML office, please come and check out in my office that amazing 1927 story that predates by 10 years the federal prohibition and the supposed conspiracy that made hemp illegal. Mitch, I know you're an academic, and you have an activist soul, and you're so generous to all of us, but I'm going to put you on the spot here because we've never talked about this before, but what will it take? I mean, given you had your total druthers, and you didn't have to work through the politics of all this, which has made my hair prematurely gray, but is it civil, as Tom has suggested, do we have to get Gandhi in here, which is something I've always advocated here. It's one thing for us to put our money on the table, put our suits on and advocate, but we're not putting our bodies in front of them. We're not making them step over our bodies to go into their workplace or go to their churches or synagogues. Some of us have, and they've won awards here for being so brave, but not in toto, not us, the middle class, suit-wearing people. Is it mass advertising? If we had $5 million on the table every year with the best, as again Tom alluded to, messaging, could we message this better? Or in some ways, do we keep converting the elites, which I think Ethan has been very successful in his 20 years of trying to get those who are really resourceful and have so much sway over society to embrace these reforms. So what would you do, given your druthers?
It's funny because I've fallen into the science of persuasion. It seems as if more and more cannabis-related data may not be what we need. It's pretty obvious when you look at this literature that cannabis is harmless. Now, what do I need to find out? What do I need to investigate? How do I get my friends to vote for these things? Right? How do I get my mother-in-law to vote for this? Right? She's in London. She's got Rick Steves' book. That's my way to get to it. Right? Each of us has a friend who smokes pot who's not a member of NORML. We got to reach these folks. And the way I've been starting is 50 million Elvis fans can't be wrong. Okay. Social proof. Now that we're polling above 50%, I go to people and I say, look, most Americans think a tax and regulated market is better. Why do you think they think that? And then I've got them generating a reason for why prohibition needs to end. And suddenly they're on our way. Hey, I'm sending in my monthly pledge to NORML. Give me $1 and I'll add it. Right? And then suddenly they're an activist too. They take on this identity. And the persuasion literature is on our side with this. It's just each of us has to talk to somebody like Richard Lee's mom did in the gym. Each of us has to ask a friend for $1. Each of us has to go to the people who we're not out to and, God forbid, come out to them. And then we're going to make it happen because we've got to do it soon.
Well, the allusion to tithing, if you will, the idea of reaching down and making everybody in the row feel like, I gotta put a little in the game. We failed, I think, as a movement to do that. We're kind of insular, if you will. And so for myself, at last year's conference, my lecture was, do things beyond marijuana. Have interest beyond marijuana, because we can't get everybody involved in these reforms if we're just sort of monolithic about just being obsessed about hemp saving the world, or that marijuana is the greatest thing since sliced bread, which it is. But so thank you, Mitch. In terms of now messaging, if we as reformers were to have that proverbial $5 million to put out all kinds of ads, what would be in the 3 or 4 areas you would touch upon? What would you advanced reformers should be messaging about?
This is going to increase the peace. We have data to suggest that when police officers aren't back down at the precinct fingerprinting somebody for an ounce, they're keeping rapists and murderers off our streets. And that, I think, is first and foremost the one we can go with. Let's increase the peace by creating this tax and regulated market.
which is one of the reasons why I've always said the most single important group of the 30 or 40 that are chartered involved with marijuana law and drug policy reform today, while they might not have the most resources, they have the most sway morally and politically, is the law enforcement against prohibition. This is a group we all have to support. League has a narrative none of us can bring to the table, and I think it addresses Mitch's concern about peace and public safety. Well, Emily, having heard everybody here talk about like how we got from point A to point B, how is it, do you think, that we can communicate better not only to parents, but to this new generation of children that have so much access to information instantaneously, could literally today, with my iPhone, put in a few keywords and pull down more information than I ever could have gotten in 6 years of undergraduate studies. 6, of course.
I think that's a really important question. I mean, I was a DARE graduate, Stand Tall, all of these other things. All of these, I mean, I remember watching Cartoon All-Stars to the Rescue, reading the new Teen Titans comic books. I mean, there's something to be said for coming of age in the early 1990s, isn't there? So there was a massive amount of information that was specifically being targeted to children aged 10 and under, telling them that...
Put the microphone on.
Oh yeah, sorry. So there's all this information being targeted specifically to children who are 10 and under, telling them, you know, one toke, addicted, death, horrible things will happen to you. Also responding to the crack cocaine epidemic, which is something on a totally different scale. But there is this movement and there is this initiation and there is this impetus to start talking to these children about this at such an early age. And I feel as though because so much information is available, and one of the things that the parent movement did turn around, you know, the harm reduction argument was kind of taken off of the table. But I think that should be back on there. And one of the things that you do see happening with anti-drug education now, the focus is more on making responsible choices. And I think that's actually important, to be able to teach kids how to make responsible choices, but giving them all of the information rather than just this totally coded, totally biased stuff. Will that happen? I don't know. One of the things I want to talk to, one of the people I want to talk to are my friends who are currently elementary school teachers, people I went to high school with who have gone into education. And I want to see if DARE is still around. I know it's in a few schools. I mean, it's been overwhelmingly proven to not be effective. Come on, but I died immediately after my first toke, and untrue. But I think it's about offering children. I mean, children aren't dumb. I think that's the other thing. The parent movement really thought that kids were really stupid, and they're not. They're intelligent. They're intelligent, very small human beings. So I think offering them a variety of information. And then offering them the ability to learn how to make choices for themselves. And that's the platform of MAMA, still, Mothers Against Misuse and Abuse. So it's the ability to offer children a wide variety of information, a wide array of it, as opposed to simply giving them one totally pervasive and totally biased perspective.
I was asked to speak to one of my nephews. I don't have children, I'm not blessed in that respect, but my brothers and sisters are. And so I said, well, could you talk to one of the kids about, you know what, from your perspective, now that we're having to confront it. And I found myself, you know, trying to work through, like, you know, use versus abuse. And we get done, the kid says, have you gone up to that recent dab site? You can watch people, like, dab and, like, totally lose it. It's 14. And so the idea that, like, we think we know, we can communicate with them, and they're already way out culturally ahead of us. I was shocked. I was kind of scared. We're going to try to do about 10 minutes of Q&A since we've got folks up here, but I want to just wind it down with like one open question that I kind of like to end these things on, looking forward to today. Emily, when marijuana is legal, will it still be fun?
Yeah.
Mitch, thinking about, I'll put a little more meat on the bone regarding like liabilities and things like that. I mean, in 20 or 30 years where marijuana may well be a legal tax-controlled substance like alcohol, tobacco, pharmaceuticals potentially, will we enjoy it?
Dave Lenson, who was a professor of yours at UMass, he has suggested that no, it will no longer be cool, it will no longer be hip, it won't even get you high. And this is a pharmacological test that I can't wait to conduct.
That's a great example of the depth of this panel. I haven't thought about David in years, and you're right, he was so forward-looking to think that when it's legal, will we still even want to seek it? The forbidden fruit concept, he explored fully in the most wonderful, culturally literature way. Well, Keith, if something tells me I know the answer about when marijuana is legal, will you still see it as being fun?
Well, I think what we have to keep in mind, there are two small concepts there. One is that as long as it has been illegal, marijuana smoking has been sort of a communion among those of us who are willing to break the law with people we maybe didn't know before we passed that joint around the circle. And there is some benefit to that. So let's be honest, that sometimes it feels very reinforcing to be part of an underground network that has the courage to say to hell with your marijuana laws. So yes, we will miss that part of it. But keep in mind, marijuana makes food taste better, music sound better, and sex feel better. So I think it'll still be fun.
Gail, you grew up in Cincinnati, more or less. You went to school in the East, you went to Harvard. You then had a choice. You chose to move to truly one of the most bohemian, progressive places in the country. You moved there and started NORML, California NORML, in the midst of the darkest period of the drug war. So, and you've seen marijuana go from something that was truly like Dennis Perone and supermarkets, and you got to go know the right person, the right code word to go buy it, to walking by hundreds of storefronts. You can see advertisements in your local paper. The media, whether it's editorial boards or columnists, are almost uniformly in favor of reform. So in 10 or 20 years, beyond the medical qualities, would you find yourself probably still seeking out cannabis as something that you would see as fun?
Oh, I hope so. And I will say, I've lived in the Netherlands, and we're de facto legal, and it was still fun there. So I expect that to continue, yes.
That's a great point. For those who haven't experienced that. And it was funny, I was with Keith the first time he went to the Netherlands, and we, everybody wasn't organized yet to go out and do this services. We were there very early, and so we just slipped off to some little place, and of no notoriety whatsoever, and no quality, as I recall. And so he said, oh, okay, and I think he ordered like something like chocolate orange Buddha. It sounded like exotic or something like that. And there was still this almost paranoia. Here's this guy who founded NORML, the marijuana law reform movement, and you could still see the paranoia. As he's rolling this joint, and he lights it up. I think, wow, there he goes. He's letting out the first legal marijuana hit in his life. and he goes, I got better shit at home. Dale's point is very well taken that when you do land in that environment, when it's free, it feels so odd. For me, regarding drinking, the analogy is, I was a binge drinker in my misspent youth. But the moment I became 21, it had no more appeal to me whatsoever. And I think, I don't know, you can't argue from one, but I think that that's probably a universal feeling in some respects. So with about just, only about 5 to 8 minutes for some questions here. We've got a mic
in the center.
In the center, somewhere.
There's Mike.
There's a mic out there.
Well, it's way in the back, sorry. So with only 3 or 4 questions, hopefully, and then we're going to break and come back for the next panel. So Eric could grab the mic and, yeah, go ahead.
My name is Bill Britt, Director of Association of Patient Advocates. On October 16th, we'll be going to Washington, D.C. to challenge the scheduling with Americans for Safe Access. What is the hope of this this kind of action?
Keith, you want to comment? They're talking about the rescheduling.
Well, obviously, it's, I think, the third in a series of petitions to reschedule marijuana under the 1970 Federal Controlled Substances Act. We have to keep the pressure on, and I'm delighted that the coalition is yet back in court trying to force them to deal honestly with this. But I will tell you, I don't think that's how we're ever going to win this issue. I think we're going to have to win it the old-fashioned way by having more support in Congress than opponents. Even if overnight marijuana was rescheduled from, say, Schedule 1 to Schedule 2 or 3 or 4, it still has to be approved by the FDA. It usually takes $100 million in at least 10 years. And no pharmaceutical company is going to put that kind of money into it unless they can patent it. And they can't patent home smoked marijuana. So I'm delighted that we continue to try to reschedule, and I think eventually we will, so that perhaps patients can get it through pharmacies. But I will tell you that I think what may hold that back is when you get drugs like side effects that are coming along, have been approved in Canada and Western Europe and will soon probably be approved in the US, they are effective enough based on the research that I've seen. And you can titrate them because you take it as a drop under your tongue. So once a state legislator has the choice of legalizing medical marijuana by way of a pharmaceutical, I do not think they will ever again allow us to use whole smoked marijuana as a medicine. So be careful. I think that may be a box canyon.
But Bill, the data are on your side, man.
Exactly. Excellent. Yeah, all the science is in there. There's no doubt about it. But as the clock ticks, right now, if we run this out as past this prologue, we're in the 8th year of a 23-year legal battle. So no matter what happens, they have enough dilatory tactics that they can get us to at least the 23-year mark in this case. Excellent question, Bill. Another one?
Yes, hi, Dan Levine, Executive Director, Patients for Full Legalization PAC. But my question is a short one. The federal government, since the Supreme Court ruled genetic organisms could be patented, owns the patent on the antioxidant and neuroprotective properties of cannabis. What do you see that patent, what role do you see it playing into the future, and what are they up to?
Dale or Mitch?
Well, actually, I don't think that patent is going to have very much effect on anything because the government is not about to make use of the patent. The government's only pot producer is NIDA, and NIDA doesn't want to get in the medical market. And I really think the whole patent issue is going to be irrelevant to cannabis, the herb. Then you're going to see lots of patents about things like Sativex and other kinds of extracts and chemical entities. But I think that that's not going to affect the way cannabis is available.
That said, the antioxidant properties are now well established, and I think that what gives me so much hope about all of us being around for so long.
Very good.
Another question?
Hi, I'm Jesse Silverman from New York City, and I remember when Barney Frank told us all in Washington, D.C., dude, you guys are too obsessed with history. People don't care about that. They don't want to hear about history. They want to know now, should marijuana be legal or not, and stop boring people. That said, I remember Dr. John Morgan, and I have friends right now who are medical doctors and members of NORML that are still saying, at least in New York City, there definitely was a recreational hashish and marijuana market at the turn of the century. And just from some of the history that we went into today, should New York be an exception there? Were there many people who were commercially sharing cannabis for the same reasons people like it now? Because there's people who are still saying that. Isn't that true?
Actually, there wasn't much of a commercial market as an intoxicant. There was briefly in the 1850s and 1860s when cannabis was sort of popularized in the United States and introduced, and the famous book by Fitzhugh Ludlow was published, popularized cannabis. There was a brief spate of hashish products that got marketed commercially. There was a reaction against them from medical societies saying, hey, you shouldn't be advertising hashish candy, that's inappropriate, this is a medicine. And those advertisements disappeared. By the 1890s, 1900, you had basically a pharmaceutical market. You went into the pharmacy and you could buy these things, but they were never promoted as an intoxicant at that time, at that date. So there was 100 years ago, people had second thoughts about any use of intoxicants whatsoever. And that has sort of stayed with us ever since, to tell you the truth.
We'll take one more question, and before we take the question, I'd like to, in advance, thank the panel for coming to California, investing so much time and energy to be here, and to share your expertise, which ranged across, and I'm sure they'll be willing that they're here afterwards to talk. So let's have the last question for this panel.
Hi, I'm Loretta Turner. I'm a founding member of the NORMLCON College chapter. I work with a lot of children, particularly my younger brother who's 13, a lot of nieces and nephews. I babysit a lot. They've all asked me questions about marijuana, and I'm very much stumped as to what to tell them, how to move forward. And as an activist, I don't really want to tell my brother that I smoke a lot of pot, but at the same time, I have to and be honest. So how do I work with children? How do I tell them?
I would certainly defer to the three parents on here about how they did it, but I will suggest that whenever I take this question a ton, as you can imagine, I refer them to one book. It's not perfect, but it's now 25 to 27 years old, and I still think it holds water. That's Dr. Andy Wiles and Winifred Rosen's From Chocolate to Morphine, which basically makes the argument to the child, in your lifetime, literally from chocolate all the way to something as dangerous and addictive as morphine, you will interact with in your life. And to a point I raised with Emily regarding, isn't it really about use versus abuse? That's the paradigm we have for alcohol. If you use alcohol responsibly, then it's really no concern of the government. But if you misuse it or abuse it, clearly, obviously, self-evidently, there are rules and regulations around it. So that's my suggestion, that one single book really helps put the onus on the child and the parent to understand you're never going to live there's never been a drug-free atoll, mountaintop, desert place, never was, probably never will be, probably never should be. So, but I would defer to the parents about how do they talk about it. Gail or Emily, about children?
I would like to mention Mitch's book.
Yes.
So he doesn't have to mention himself. I just picked it up. It's a parent's guide to talking about marijuana with your child. I'll let the author continue to
The key is this just part of the big relationship. What do you say to your children about marijuana? It's the same thing you say to your children about other decisions about their health. We have data to suggest that cannabis is really not for kids. I love you guys. I love cannabis. I look forward to the time when your brain is developed, when you've got so much physical development, mental development, emotional development, that we get the chance to share it.
What about raising children?
Well, my daughter, who's now 43 and lives just a few miles from here, and I have two lovely grandsons, she grew up at my feet at all of the early NORML meetings, sometimes Ramsey Clark and Hunter Thompson, and then there'd be my little daughter, Lindsay. And there were a lot of people, I'm sure, that felt that was inappropriate, that, my God, what damage have I done to that young woman? Well, like most generational changes, my daughter has no interest in smoking marijuana. And in fact, when I go visit her, I smoke with my son-in-law, her husband, and she laughs that it's only when her father comes to visit there's ever any marijuana in the house. So I think largely, and now again, obviously I didn't turn my daughter on, but she was around it, and it was no big deal. So I think Mitch's approach is right. Let's just be honest about it, and there's nothing wrong with telling a child that they will be allowed to do a lot of things once they're a little more mature, but it's simply too early. They may not like it, but that is part of being a parent. And as I say, didn't seem to do any damage to my daughter whatsoever, the fact that she was at an awful lot of NORML meetings with a lot of marijuana smoke in the air.
Dale, you sent a daughter off to college.
Yeah, let me say I had the same experience as Keith did in this. I brought up my daughter around, she was around marijuana from infancy in one way or another. She was in marijuana gardens, but she always, when she saw it used, it was being used by adults like alcohol, and you know, we just brought her up with the understanding that this is one of the things that grown-ups do, and we never had any problem with it until the one difficulty I can think of was when she first entered kindergarten, and I had to explain to her that there was this society had a different attitude toward marijuana, and it was illegal, and so she had to be a little discreet about discussing it, and it was very hard for me to even explain to her why that would be the case, because she just sort of took it naturally. I will say she graduated from high school. She was one of her class to have the drug-free award for not using any alcohol or drugs the whole time she was in high school. God bless her heart. She's I think become more of an adult more recently, but I think that I think there's an awful lot of backlash against hippie parents, though.
In some ways, we could turn to our friends in the anti-drug world and say, if you want kids not to use marijuana, Again, thank you very much for this panel. We're going to break for 15 minutes and come back and have a forward look and a frank discussion about legalization, taxation. Thank you. We'll be back about 12.